Hey, what's going on, Clipper people? It is me, William the Opinion Updike.
And I am positive Chuck Mockler.
And today we have a massive play-in preview
Oh,
for you.
yeah.
We're speaking with Ben Beecken of LockedOn Timberwolves to
Mm-hmm.
get both sides of this play-in extravaganza. And also we're going to talk about some hot takes and what else we need to do to get a win in shavings. So all that and more coming up right about now.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into a crossover Locked On Play-In Edition podcast. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves, here with Chuck Mockler of Locked On Clippers. How's it going, Chuck?
Pretty good. Very nervous. We're recording this the night before, but yeah, don't know what to expect, but we can all guarantee it's probably going to be pretty tense.
You're nervous. I'm nervous. I speak for all Timberwolves fans in saying that we're collectively nervous. I should say today's episode is brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com and use the promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. So what we're going to do, we're going to preview this series. I keep thinking of it as a series. We're going to preview this one crazy single game to determine who gets the 7 seed and just kind of go back and forth with what we might expect to see, what we're nervous about, what we're excited to see. The season series, as we know, the Clippers won 3 games. The Timberwolves only won 1. 3 of those came in like an 11-day span back in November, though. Both teams look very different.
Yeah.
Or I guess Paul George played in those games, but no D'Angelo Russell in 2 of those 3 games, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one game the Timberwolves won, no Karl Anthony Towns. So both teams are very different.
Yes, it's very difficult to project what's going to happen in this game. They haven't seen, like you said, the full versions of each other. It's just kind of been these weird, incomplete, and we saw the Timberwolves before the trade deadline, so it's way different now too. You mentioned earlier when we were kind of going back and forth about this, Vanderbilt wasn't starting in the first 2 games, which is kind of a big deal now. So it's going to be interesting. I'm a little interested to see. I mean, the Clippers live and die basically on paint touches on the offense. If we're getting paint touches, things are usually going pretty well. And with Norm coming to the team, that's really helped things out. But it's just a new look Clippers team versus this Wolves team that's playing some pretty good basketball right now.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm worried about, conversely, is the Timberwolves struggle to defend the paint oftentimes. Their whole goal is to not allow the ball to get that deep, because if it's gotten into the paint, they're in trouble. They don't have really paint protectors. Naz Reid's fine when he's in the game, but he's only in the game when Cat's off the floor, and then you've obviously got bigger problems when Cat's not on the floor. Jared Vanderbilt's an okay shot blocker, but he's more about being rangy and athletic, being mobile. The Timberwolves are just trying to essentially blitz the pick and roll. They're trying to play a high wall pick and roll defense. And the Clippers are a smart, crafty veteran team that very well could find a way to kind of get around that aggressive defense and use the Timberwolves' aggression against them. That's one of the things the Wolves have struggled with, is occasionally gambling a little too much, not recovering on the back end defensively. So paint touches are certainly something that I'd be worried about. And then along with that, rebounding the basketball. Neither team's a good defensive rebounding team.
No, they're not.
No, they're not. But like going back and looking at it, the Clippers dominated the glass in those first 3 games in November. And, obviously you look at it now, and I believe the Clippers are like bottom 3 in defensive rebound rate. The Wolves are as well. So I don't know what to expect there necessarily. I feel like maybe the Clippers shifted their strategy, or will shift their strategy again against the Wolves, because the Timberwolves are so bad on the defensive glass. What do you think about that?
The glass is interesting. I put in my notes that, the Wolves, for as bad as they are at defensive rebounding, are borderline elite at offensive rebounding. Top 10 in offensive rebounds per game, top 10 offensive rebound percentage. You have Patrick Beverley, who, if there's a bet to take on, spiteful offensive rebounds, I would take the over on it. So I'm really worried about that, honestly, for the Clippers. That is how we've lost to good teams. That's how we've lost to some teams maybe we should have beat. But we need Terrence Mann to be really active when he's out there. Marcus Morris doesn't grab a bunch of rebounds, but good things tend to happen for him offensively, kind of bringing the ball up after he does do that. So I'm really hoping our wings, if they're not too tired from chasing around, the size that you guys have, are going to be able to kind of crash on the glass. Zubats is okay against Karl Anthony Towns. He's as good as he kind of wants to be in terms of physicality, so he's going to be sealing him off, and we just need guys to crash the glass.
Yeah, Zubats didn't play in the game that the Timberwolves won. Neither did Karl Anthony Towns, by the way. That was in like early January, I think. But Towns actually struggled with Zubats a little bit, and we'll get to this, I think, a little bit later, how the Clippers actually defended Towns, and they were one of the teams that kind of set the blueprint for how to defend Towns early in the
Hmm.
season. Now, Towns is a different player than he was in November as well, but Zubats' physicality in the paint, he's one of the few Clippers that can rebound his position fairly well. That could be a challenge for Minnesota. One other thing that I flagged is something that I'm worried about is point of attack defense. That's been one of the challenges for the Wolves all year. I don't know exactly how they're going to try and guard Paul George. He obviously didn't play in the game the Wolves beat the Clippers in January, but I think 2 of the 3 he played in November, he was just completely dominant. It was right
Yeah.
during a stretch that the Clippers were playing phenomenal, and so was Paul George. Or actually, I think the start of that stretch, the Clippers weren't, but they kind of turned it around against the Wolves, if I'm remembering correctly. And the Wolves, I don't know how they're going to guard Paul George. I tend to think it'll be a little bit of Anthony Edwards. He's actually been, despite how terrible he was overall defensively as a rookie, and he still has bad lapses off the ball. He's actually
Okay.
been, I would call him a slightly above average on ball defender, and at times very good. But there's also the foul trouble thing. You want to be careful there. So I think we'll see some Jared Vanderbilt. We may see some Jaden McDaniels on Paul George. I don't think we'll see much Patrick Beverly there, but we might. Point of attack defense is something the Wolves have really been on a roller coaster with all season.
That's kind of, I feel like these teams are kind of looking in the mirror a bit with some of their strengths and weaknesses, because with the Clippers, if Reggie Jackson isn't exactly, he's not a lockdown defender. I'm not saying that at all. But if he's not locked into defense, you can really just kind of see him chasing the ball and things will look good. And same with Marcus Morris. Nick Batum's going to be starting in this game with Marcus Morris. I hope Batum doesn't have to do too much to kind of shore everything up if Marcus Morris isn't fully there, physically or just mentally as well. We've seen some lapses on that end too. So it really feels like it's going to be battle of which team can just string together a couple paint stops in a row to try and put the other one, behind the 8 ball. The Clippers also, the offense is fantastic right now. I think the last 6 games, it's like 124 rating. I know we ended on a back-to-back against the Kings and whatever the Thunder are doing, so it is skewed a little bit. But if we cannot get down 10 points in the first quarter, I will really like our chances in this game, because the Clippers do tend to make things a little harder than they need to be sometimes.
Yeah, and the Timberwolves, one of their trends recently is Karl-Anthony Towns has had monster first quarters, but then hasn't done much the rest of the game as opposing teams kind of adjust. He hits the bench early second quarter typically, and I don't know if it's just the rest throws him off, or sometimes it is adjustments by the opposing coach, and then he kind of slows down the rest of the game. If the Wolves do get off to a good start, I I hope for that. I hope that there's no overconfidence on the Timberwolves' part, because that
Sure.
has happened, and everybody's kind of talked about these cocky young Wolves that are trying to, everybody knows about clowning Russell Westbrook, which I'm sure you don't mind.
Oh, no. Fine
Some
over here.
some of that stuff. So who knows? You mentioned Morris, and you mentioned physicality. We talked about points in the paint, and the battle in the paint. Something that I'm a little bit worried about as well with the Wolves is they do struggle sometimes with physicality. And while they will play kind of in your face and they'll talk the talk, they don't always walk the walk when it comes to physicality. And Patrick Beverly's an exception, obviously.
Sure. Of
Um,
course.
but I mean, like they can shy away sometimes, and they can also get ahead of themselves in terms of being worried about the officiating. And
Mhm.
Beverly, of course, also Karl-Anthony Towns. And that worries me a little in a play in a 1 game situation.
Yeah, we talked on our last episode. We're wondering if there's going to be any kind of, because the Clippers know Pat Bev and maybe know what can kind of get under his skin a little bit. We wonder if there's going to be some gamesmanship there between some of the older Clippers and Pat Bev.
Yeah.
I think the home court advantage is going to be huge for you guys. I think that the stadium is going to be absolutely insane in Minnesota. But that could maybe play into getting a little ahead of themselves. Who knows? I'm just hoping we don't have to see the comeback Clips again. I'm wondering kind of what the bench rotation looks like for the Clippers. Luke Kennard is questionable with a sore hamstring, which regular season, it's a big deal. Playoffs, it's a big deal as well. The floor spacing is, we have a lot of good catch and shoot guys, a couple guys in the 40s, a couple guys in the high 30s. So it's not like there's a steep drop off, but we still need that spacing. And for what it's worth, our athletic reporter, Law Murray, said he'd be surprised if Kennard played. So I'm actually genuinely hoping Ty Lue kind of throws you and Chris Finch a curveball by going with Norm and Covington off the bench for Reggie and Zoo, and to go 5 early in this one.
Interesting. Yeah, the Wolves bench rotation, excuse me, hasn't been super consistent. And I think one of the things Chris Finch has been good at in his first full year as a head coach is pushing the right buttons and, adjusting on the fly. But again, we're talking
Mhm.
about one game. This isn't a 7-game series, and I mean, it is
It's
essentially,
terrifying.
it is. And like, how fast do you pull the plug on your game plan? Like how do you adjust? And Ty Lue's obviously got far more experience at the NBA level in the playoffs.
Sure.
I mean, Chris Finch has 0, but, um, what does that look like in this one game? How quickly does either coach adjust? And the Wolves bench is, for a while, it was, for a chunk, like January to mid-February, it was the highest scoring bench in the league. And then
Okay.
recently it's kind of fallen back, again, which is what we saw early this season. It's kind of, is Malik Beasley on? Is Jalen Noel on? How many
Right.
minutes does Jalen Noel get? Is Jaden McDaniels kind of floating around, or is he being aggressive, putting the ball on the floor, making his open 3-point attempts? One of the things I said about the Clippers earlier this year is their depth, which generally should matter less in a one game play-in because you're playing your guys. But
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you never know with foul trouble and everything else.
And there probably will be some foul trouble. I think Zoo, if there's probably going to be a tight whistle on him, there tends to be. He of course never thinks he commits a foul, but if Zoo gets into foul trouble early, we will need Hartenstein to bring that physicality and the ball movement that he can, and kind of shoulder a pretty important load in terms of like regular playing responsibility that he maybe hasn't seen in the regular season.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, next let's talk about, we're gonna get to talk about some key matchups in this game, individual players, etc. First though, Chuck, I think you want to tell us about Prize Picks.
Oh, I've been dying to talk about Prize Picks. We talked about it right off top. Prize Picks does have the most NBA DFS prop games on the market. Is the best as well. Excuse me. They offer more NBA props than any other DFS prop operator, and offer all the superstar players as well as the Malik Beasleys and Isaiah Hartensteins of the world. Only recording a handful of minutes during the game. Prize Picks offers any prop you can think of, from yardage to touchdowns, even interceptions thrown and 3-pointers made. If you deposit $100 and use promo code NBA, you'll get matched up to $100, which is fantastic. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over/under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times any entry. And it's just you versus the projected numbers. Prize Picks allows mixed sport entries. You can bet on Mahomes touchdowns. You can bet on which team Frank Vogel's going to end up on. Maybe, who knows? Use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Don't hesitate. Check out prizepicks.com and use promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. And if I wanted to maybe bet somewhere else online, where could I do that, Ben?
Let me tell you, betonline.net
Of
is your number
course.
one source for all your betting stats and sports info. We were actually just talking about the line before this.
Mm-hmm.
And the Timberwolves are favored by 2.5 at home. The over-under, for what it's worth, is 230.5, which is actually only the second highest over-under among the playing games. Hornets and Hawks, maybe no surprise,
Interesting.
or 237.
Yeah.
Every Clippers Wolves game this year has been really high scoring. I haven't done the math to see exactly how high scoring, but they were all blowouts. They all featured a lot of points scored. I don't know. Wolves by 2.5. I would have predicted that the line was around 2, so it's maybe
Sure.
a little higher than I would have said it.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
I think I'd
Seems
maybe go under, but I still would pick the Clips on the money line.
okay. All right. Fair enough. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and new features, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right. Now that we have wagered a considerable amount of money on these two different platforms we have, let's talk key matchups. Ben, you kind of alluded to the point of attack defense, and I see that that is also on your key matchups.
It is. Who's Patrick Beverly going to guard, which I think is interesting. Also, for a lot of reasons, maybe most importantly, though, I mentioned this earlier, who's going to guard Paul George? I do think it could be Jared Vanderbilt off the opening tip. We've seen him take on some bigger wings. He's
Mm-hmm.
obviously, he's the 4 on the Timberwolves, and he a little undersized in terms of his height, but he's very long. He's athletic. He's extremely mobile. And he is comfortable playing on the perimeter. Uh, he also is prone to getting into foul trouble against quicker wings because he is, after all, power forward. And they've gotten into some trouble this year with some of those matchups where he picks up a couple of quick fouls. And, going to Jaden McDaniels, I would actually argue Jaden McDaniels is the better perimeter defender, but
Okay.
he's been even more foul prone than Vanderbilt, and he doesn't
Well,
start. So I think Vando probably starts on Paul George. And then, they generally try and hide D'Lo a little bit, although he's been better this year on the ball than he has been really ever in his career, in my opinion. He's been roughly, I think, average in terms of on-ball defense, which is a huge win.
Yeah.
And Anthony Edwards has been pretty good too. So, foul trouble is something you have to consider, but I think it's whoever's guarding Paul George, can they make his life difficult and not get into serious foul trouble?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you guys are going to blitz Paul George kind of on the pick and roll. It kind of tends to be, yeah, like Ant and Vanderbilt coming at him in the pick and roll.
Mhm.
Ty Lue has joked that he hopes teams blitz Paul George kind of on the pick and roll because he has been really good at playmaking, all things considered, for what Paul George can do. So if Paul George's passing is on point early and we don't see, there's a very common thread sometimes with Paul George's playmaking is there will just be a what the fuck was that turnover? Where you're just like, why is it so nonchalant? Why are you passing it to a guy in the second row? So if that's locked in early, and if the Wolves are blitzing and kind of have to hedge those bets, I really like the Clippers' chances at getting those paint touches and at least creating opportunities for themselves.
Yeah, and the MO for the Wolves defense earlier this year was they were getting by. It felt a little bit like it was smoke and mirrors because they were a terrible defensive rebounding team. They were worse than the NBA for most of the year. They committed the most fouls of any defense. They still do. I think they're 29th in opponent foul rate
Oh
or
wow,
defensive free throw rate. They're 29th. And the Clippers, of course, don't get to the line that often. But those two statistics, it's two of the four factors, right? And how are the Wolves a top 10 defense, which they were until really the end of December when COVID hit the team. Um, but it's because they were blitzing teams and they were being aggressive. They were using their length and their athleticism, and they weren't putting Karl Anthony Towns into a stupid drop coverage like they did the last 4 years. And it worked. But then, of course, teams figured out how to beat it. They were essentially throwing skip passes, just moving the ball quickly,
hmm
and back cuts were killing the Timberwolves. So then the Wolves tried to adjust. And more recently, they mixed in some drop coverage. They mixed in switching on the pick and roll, which has been more of a mixed bag. The drop coverage still hasn't really worked. And the idea, obviously, is that you can have multiple looks when it comes to the playoffs. But the only thing that, in my opinion, they've been consistently good at is playing that high wall pick and roll, aggressive blitzing coverage where they're getting their hands in the passing lane. And if you have somebody who's on point, like a Paul George or Reggie Jackson, I know has been really up and down as he typically is, but he was really
sure.
good against the Wolves earlier this year. Um, I mean, those are the types of guys that can beat this coverage, and that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, if it's going to be interesting how we kind of stagger Paul George. He probably will play the whole first quarter, so we're going to see him and Norm early. And if those two are clicking early, I feel pretty good about their chances in this one. It's been, I think, just 4 games together. So they're kind of learning on the fly for sure. And Reggie Jackson, you mentioned him being up and down. It's the Reggie roller coaster that we've all come to kind of just accept our fate. Like he's either going to score 15 points on 16 shots or he's going to put up, 32 on 18 shots. And it's going to be fantastic. Thankfully, his usage won't be as high in that scenario or in this scenario, excuse me. And you kind of touched on this about D'Angelo Russell. The Clippers should be looking to put him in motion whenever he's on the floor.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see a pretty healthy dose of just trying to get the switch on to D'Lo.
Yeah. And he, one of his issues has always been he doesn't fight through screens. He's an intelligent player and he
Yeah,
is very long. He's pretty big for a point guard, but he doesn't fight through screens. He doesn't like to get physical and he's not super athletic. And so those kind of combine, he can get lost in the wash pretty easily. And if he's on, he's actually a fairly average on ball defender this year and can do those things. You'd like to think that the effort's there in a play-in game in a one game situation, but
right.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing is how the Clippers, and I'm curious to see what you think about this, how the Clippers are going to guard Karl Anthony Towns. We saw them kind of create the blueprint I mentioned earlier for how to defend Towns early in the year. The Wolves were putting him in the post. He was destroying teams the first couple of weeks of the season. The Clippers said, hey, we're going to guard him with Nicholas Batum. We're going to, put Zubats on, I think, Jared Vanderbilt, I guess, or
Yeah,
whoever was starting at
yeah,
the time, McDaniels, who's not an offensive threat. And then we can bracket him if Towns goes in the post on Batum. We can front him. We can bring some help from the backside. And now the counter to that, more recently has been Towns is just playing on the perimeter all the time. And if you put a
yeah.
4 on him, he can find his way into the post. He can shoot the 3. He could take, if you put a big on him, he's going to take him off the dribble. So I'm curious what you think the Clippers are going to try and do to slow down Towns.
I think we're going to see Batum on him early, for sure, and then just kind of hope the hedging with Zoo works. I'm also, Ty Lue's talked about how the Clippers haven't been playing what they've been practicing, right? Like these last 4 games, those last 2 games, no one played on Sunday. The other one was against the Kings on Saturday. We had, it just wasn't the time to show what you're going to do 4 days later in the play-in. So I don't think we'll see something, anything too crazy. I just think we might go small a little sooner, just to make kind of, the Wolves and Cat just run around a little bit. and get your guys in motion. But I'm a little nervous at how much responsibility Nick Batum does have in this game. Not that I don't think he can do it. It's just kind of it's an important hinge for him to be. And we mentioned the Zoo foul trouble. If Zoo gets into foul trouble, I'm not sure what the communication looks like with Batum and whoever else is going to be next to him if we have to kind of run some newer lineups.
Yeah, and Towns foul trouble. I mean, he's still one of the more foul prone players in the league. He's cut back on the offensive fouls a lot, which are typically cheap offensive fouls where he just doesn't control himself. He picks up a lazy moving screen foul, maybe once a game still, but it's still far down. It was like midway through the season, and it was still almost a third of his foul calls were offensive fouls. It was the highest offensive foul rate. Yeah, it was crazy. It was like 32% or something, which was by far the highest percentage of personal fouls that were on the offensive end of anybody in the league. For the most part of the reason the Timberwolves started playing high wall is to protect Towns. And he's also long and he's pretty mobile, but that, helped keep him from getting into too much foul trouble by playing drop coverage and swiping at the ball, which he had a bad habit of doing, or getting beat at the rim. So generally they've improved there, but it's always a concern because if Towns gets into foul trouble, obviously everything kind of unravels. And all it takes is a couple of dumb plays and he's prone to do that. And they're in a bad way.
2 fouls on the first would be a nightmare for Carlin or kind of for Zubats.
Yeah.
So real quick, I know we're coming to the closer of this segment. Give me one non-starter who you think is going to be a big factor in this game, and then just a quick, maybe 2-sentence prediction.
Non-starter, man. I'm going to go with. I want to say Jalen Noel because I love Jalen Noel. I guess I have to stick with it since I said it. Malik Beasley would be the other one. If I could cheat and pick two, it'd be Jalen Noel because I think this is the type of moment that he's all about. He's a dynamic scorer. He's been way better than Malik Beasley this year. Okay. Beasley's obviously got the contract. He's the better shooter, in a vacuum, but he just hasn't had a good season. So if Beasley's off, my hope is that Chris Finch pivots to Jalen Noel early on. And Jalen Noel could make a couple of big shots, but I think that's going to be it. In terms of a prediction, I'm going to say the Timberwolves do win. I'm going to say that it's a pretty close game. I do think they cover the 2.5, and I think they win by, I'll call it 2 possessions.
That's legit. I've already talked about Norm Powell, so I'm going with Robert Covington. He has been a godsend for this team's deflections. I think he's the only player in the league with 90 blocks and steals or something like that, which is absolutely insane for what we got him for. So I think it's going to be Covington. I'm hoping he hits 2 of his 3 threes that he takes, and we're going to need it because he's been a great stabilizer for us, especially late. I'm picking the Clippers. I have to. I think it's going to be a 1-possession game, which is terrifying, and I'm very nervous. But I also want to say, I'm happy we're playing the Timberwolves strictly from a basketball perspective. This is going to be a good game. There's drama with Pat Bev and everything like that. But I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's going to be rocking in Minnesota for sure.
Yeah, it definitely will be. Target Center hasn't seen a meaningful game like this in 3+ years. And even still once now in the last 18 years. So, or one other season in 18 years, superstars, Towns, Paul George. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's easily the best, in my opinion, the best playing matchup that there is. So, all right. Well, appreciate it, Chuck. You can go ahead and listen to this on either Locked On Clippers or Locked On Wolves. And of course, we'll both be after the game. We'll have post-game reactions on our respective shows as well. Thanks, Chuck.
100%. Yep. Thank you so much, Ben. Yes, that was a fantastic talk with Ben. We got to let you know this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand the warehouse wants to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for only 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for everybody. It's fantastic. They have everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Right now, go to rockauto.com and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On, and they're how did you hear about us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Will play in hot takes. We're stressed out. Everyone's stressed out the day we're listening to this. Is this a must win? What's your hot take? How are we feeling? I'm nervous. We're recording this the night before. I'm nervous.
In terms of a must win, I would say yes. We've been talking about it. You got to view it like a game 7. I'm sure that's the way the team and the coaching staff is coming into this one. Yeah, man, it's just really difficult for me to see us making any type of noise in the playoffs, like even a murmur. If we've got to play 2 games just to get into the thing, and then we end up facing, the 1 seed instead of the 2 seed. That to me, like, no matter what, it's going to be an uphill battle. That to me just sounds like a lot more possibilities for the wheels to fall off on the uphill.
Yeah, more basketball is bad, only for the play-in, not for the playoffs, of course. What do you think? So I was talking with Ben, and I said that this was kind of an easy pick. I picked Robert Covington to be the bench player who makes the biggest impact for the Clippers. With Luke Kennard questionable, who do you think is going to step up?
I mean, Norm Powell, but I feel like that's kind of I feel like that's like the easy one too. Yeah, Norman Powell. I think obviously could be huge. I don't know. What do you think we could get out of Hart in a game like this? Like, do you think, especially if we end up no Luke, can he do enough to keep this offense moving so, they can at least tread water in non-starter minutes and ideally be able to carve out a slight advantage?
Yeah, I think, man, depending on the whistle for Zoo in this game, like Hart might end up being pretty huge for the Clippers. If Zoo gets those 2 early fouls, it depends when Tyler wants to go small and things like that. But we've mentioned Hart, Rocco, and Norm. I'm not sure how much longer the rotation is going to be. If Paul George is playing 40 minutes, we got to assume, right? And Kennard's out, like, do you go to 9 guys and toss Amir in there too? Like, I think you're right, dude. I think Hartenstein, there's a chance that he's going to have like kind of a lot of responsibility in this game if things fall a certain way early.
Yeah, definitely. I think though, and this is like not that hot of a take, but it's my hot take. I actually think that the Timberwolves having D'Angelo Russell back helps the Clippers a lot more than us playing them without him.
Okay.
Defensively, I mean, like, he's a starting guy. He's used to starting minutes, you would assume, unless you're, really willing in a 1-game scenario to do whatever it takes. Like, I think that he's going to get attacked on defense on the floor. And he's been terrible at finishing in the paint versus the Clippers, sub 40%.
Okay.
So if they're forcing him to shoot threes, which he has been very efficient from 3 against the Clippers, he shot like 43%. He has been efficient from 3. I'm not going to knock that. But if he's relegated to stuck floating around outside on the perimeter, that limits what he can do from a playmaking standpoint. And if he's just getting attacked on as many possessions as possible on the other end of the floor, that's going to be a net negative. And that takes away a piece of talent, a piece of potential, has been an all-star talent off the floor. And I think, the more you can neutralize guys like that, the better chance that this Clippers team has, even shorthanded.
Hell yeah. Ben was talking about too, who guards Paul George for the Timberwolves. Like, he was like, it's not going to be, obviously not going to be Patrick Beverley. It's not going to be D'Angelo Russell. So you're kind of putting
Vanderbilt, you think?
Yeah, we were talking about Vanderbilt, maybe Ant, but that would maybe tire him out, things like that. So that's kind of a chess match between Lou and Finch as their main guys getting the switch they want, which we're going to see a lot of. So I think my hot take is that Rocco is going to play the most minutes off the bench.
That's not very hot.
You don't think so? You think Norm will play less than Rocco in this game?
The conditioning is a thing to me,
right? I want Rocco to play more than Norm too. I don't mean that Norm's bad, but like defensively, like, and if we go small ball 5, like Rocco's got to be out there. But the conditioning, that's a very good point. Like that's kind of a question mark.
Yeah, like, can Norm play 40? Like, I mean, physically, yes, but will they be productive minutes? Like, where he's...
Man, I wonder what his cap will be.
A net positive on the floor. I mean, I think the cap is going to be... Yeah, I mean, the cap, I don't think is going to be anything dependent. He had his minutes restriction lifted. It's going to be how long he can be effective on the floor.
Yeah.
And if we're seeing... a dip in efficiency or productivity or on the defensive end of the floor, he's, that's going to be the ultimate decider of his minutes, not any sort of like predetermined number.
Right. Yeah. Ty Lue's just throwing everything at the wall in this one. Do you think there's any chance we see Amir Coffey? We already know what we need from the starters. Do we think we get that into that deep of the rotation?
With no Luke, if Luke is not good to go.
Yeah, which Law Murray thinks he will not play.
If Luke is not good to go, all bets are off, and I think that you could see.
Hell yeah! Oh, that hypes me up. Yeah, man, I'm really looking forward to this first sub. Whatever's going to happen with that, like we might see something we haven't seen from Ty Lue maybe all year, just given how little guys have played together, and not wanting to, and B, not wanting to show your cards.
Man at the 5.
Why not? I'm really hoping that Terrence Mann is on the glass is something that I'm really hoping he can bring to this one. Like, we know what Paul George has to do. We go by way of Paul George paint touches. Terrence Mann being good chaos off the bench would go a long way to help the Clippers out in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, it seems like, at least publicly, what they've said, their game plan is to shut down Paul George as much as possible.
Go for it.
And I think if they're going to be, if they're going to like be blitzing and throwing doubles at Paul George, if he can maintain this elevated level of playmaking that we've seen, which I feel like we've seen consistently since he's been back, even if the scoring hasn't always been consistent, I think that really bodes well for the Clippers.
It was interesting. Ben brought up that Karl Anthony Towns, like a third of his fouls are offensive fouls, which is like the highest in the league. It's like this really kind of weird thing they do because he'll play drop coverage and then just like swipe at people's hands. So I'm hoping they do that again. And to go inside with that, I'm hoping that Paul George can get some free throws. We haven't really seen his twos falling recently, but there was that game where him and Norm got a bunch of free throws. I don't think it'll be like that, but man, if Paul George can manage to get to the line a little early and see the ball go in, like, I would be so happy if he was actually getting calls and if he was playing like he wasn't exactly hunting for the calls like we've seen him do before.
Yeah. Which I feel like we've seen a lot less of, especially since the rule change and him sort of like being out and coming back. I do feel like we've seen him get back to placing the emphasis on like actually trying to finish versus sort of like looking for the contact. So, but they've also loosened up on those rules a little bit.
And it might change in the playoffs. Like, they're going to let guys play.
They were pretty staunch on not calling that stuff, sort of like for the first, chunk of the season, first portion of the season. But I feel like it's gone. It's regressed a little bit back to like kind of just where it has been, for a while in terms of like when they sort of call those fouls.
Yeah, that's a good call. Second most important starter other than Paul George, probably who? Reggie Jackson?
I was going to go Marcus Morris.
I was also maybe going to say Nick Batum.
Nick Batum, also a quality call. I think he's averaged like 12 points against the Timberwolves on the season this year.
I feel like he gets hot from 3 against the Timberwolves.
Yeah, he shot really well from 3 against them. But Marcus Morris, it's kind of the same thing as the D'Angelo Russell thing, right? Like, if Marcus Morris doesn't have the shot going offensively early, or he's not in spaces where he's taking gravity and creating sort of other space for his his teammates. And the defense is sort of like at the level, the low level that we've seen it be at points this season, although it does appear like he's making an effort to ramp up even in the last couple of games.
Agreed.
Then you run into the same thing where if he's will at that point be a net negative on the floor. He'll be getting attacked on defense. And if he's not demanding gravity on the offensive end of the floor, that's just going to make it that much harder for everyone else.
Real quick, I believe the Clippers, if you look at various betting sites, are around a 2.5 to 3.5 point underdog. BetOnline has them at 2.5, I believe. What's your quick prediction for this game? We getting out of here? We getting out of this game and then playing on Saturday at 12:30 against Memphis if we win?
We have to, man.
Hell yeah. We absolutely do.
And this team loves a nooner. They live for a nooner. They want that.
They're looking forward to that 12:30 start. Yeah. So if the Clips win, they'll play Memphis on Saturday at 12:30. If it goes the other way, it's back to downtown LA on Friday. Another thing we got to talk about before we close this out, Bill Simmons dropping that Kawhi is playing 3-on-3 on his podcast. What's your level of buy into this?
I don't know, man. I can't.
Too much
Look,
shit going on.
it's playing time. Like I'm done. We're officially done with like the will they won't they on this thing. I'm done. I think I'm done talking about it. We have the team that we have right now. This is what we're rolling into the
You sound like
with.
Zubats.
This is likely what we're rolling into the playoffs with,
For
assuming
sure.
we make it there. So I got to be honest, it's a non-factor for me. I think
it feels like he pulled it out of thin air. It feels like he was like he wasn't cleared for 1-on-1, so maybe by now he's cleared for 3-on-3.
And at this point, like I mean, you know, it's good to have a little bit of hope. It's good that the door isn't like actually completely closed, but I just can't devote any more time or energy into the like, oh, maybe he's gonna come back. Maybe he's gonna come back in the next round. I'm done.
The door is closed, but the doorknob's off, if that makes sense. There's still a hole in the door that you can see through.
Yeah, but that means it's even harder to open. It's impossible to open at that point.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if it's time to retire Tinfoil Hat Watch, but it's maybe open up the closet door.
It's time to focus. It's time to focus on the plan. Like, let's focus on just trying to win one of these 2 games, and then we'll see what happens from there.
And then he'll come back in the finals. It'll be great. All right, Wednesday's episode, we're going to be recapping the 7-8 play-in game, a hopeful victory, in what will no doubt be a rockin' Target Center over there in Minnesota. A What You Say Wednesday poll, which will most likely have to do with the playoffs. And then, of course, whatever else happens between now and then in Clipperland. Big shout out to Ben Beecken for joining the pod and breaking it down for us from a Wolves perspective. Will, if someone wanted to review us or the fantastic Locked On Timberwolves show, where could they possibly do that?
So you can review us over on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app on your mobile device. You can also review us over at Spotify now. It'd be great if you left a positive review over there. Really help us out. You can listen to us on either one of those platforms. You can also listen to us on Google Podcasts, on Amazon Music, on Stitcher, on Deezer. Basically anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can listen to this show. We mentioned up top, we do convention Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Pacific. Look, the tinfoil hats are off, but the play-in is on.
Yep.
Let's get it.
Let's absolutely get it. I have been positive, Chuck Mockler.
And I am William, the Opinion Updike. And as always, we appreciate you.